It was a weird way to mark my birthday earlier this year. The official shutdown of New York State happened that day. The state where I was born, shut down due to COVID-19. And it was the first Sunday of remote worship at the Unitarian Church of Harrisburg, Pennsylvania, where I serve as minister. And it was indeed my first Sunday of leading remote worship. Today is my first Sunday of leading remote worship here at the Community Church of New York, but it's not your first Sunday of attending. I know. I've attended at least a half dozen services during the spring and summer. So here we are, but where are we? Simple answer. We are gathered together as the beloved community in a time of pandemic. A century ago, in the Unison Affirmation he introduced to this church in 1919, John Haynes Holmes called this the Church Universal. Here we are, in the beloved community, which exists in time and space. The beloved community is not an ideal outside of time and space, but it has duration over time. We may choose to live in this moment, but the beloved community exists not only in this moment, but in many, many moments, one after another. And right now is a time when the people of this community, this church, are not in the same physical space at the same time, but you know, we all know, that we are still in community with each other. Here we are. Long before the pandemic, we knew the reality that we are not always in the same physical space at the same time, and that we stay connected to people over distances of time and space. We stay in contact with those who are away at school or working at a distance or serving in the military. We keep them as part of the community, even when face-to-face visits are rare. When people are absent because they are ill, we notice and we care. Church members and staff stay in touch with individuals who are frail or ill, or who are no longer able to live on their own, or whose lives call them to live and work far away from this great city. Sunday worship is at the heart of the life of this congregation. Our tradition is a tradition of preaching and hearing the word, and more than that, living the word in our lives. But attendance of Sunday worship is not a binding moral obligation whose violation constitutes a serious sin, as is the case in some other religions. Worship, however, is a core ritual of the life of the Community Church of New York as a covenanted, freely gathered, liberal religious congregation. Now, in those traditions where attendance is obligatory, it can be a grave sin to miss worship. A Catholic who misses Mass on Sunday is obliged to confess this as a sin. You may have heard of Catholic bishops waiving the obligation to attend Mass at the start of social distancing here in the United States. Of course, their next step was to close all the churches in their diocese, and virtually all churches, with some exceptions, remain closed, whether Catholic, Protestant, or otherwise. So what is so strong that it overrides not only beloved rituals such as the Sunday service and worship in various religious practices? I find it helpful to recall a principle of Judaism that is ancient but powerful to this day. Prikwat nefesh, saving a life. Saving or preserving a life is more important than virtually any other law in Judaism. Thus, for example, even before official shutdowns by government officials, the Rabbinical Council of Bergen County, New Jersey, March 12th, where 10% of the population is Jewish, ordered all of its 26-member synagogues, all of them Orthodox, to be closed and all kosher restaurants to limit meals to takeout. This is almost the most theologically and traditionally conservative Jewish denomination in our nation. Only Pikuach Nefesh proves to be more powerful than their commitment to regular and traditional worship and teaching of Orthodox Judaism. That same principle infuses Christianity, and Islam has it as well, and it is, if rarely spoken, an operative principle in Western religious and secular culture both. How could a person be a humanist if they did not put the value of preserving life above every other rule? Now, today we are not in either the Hall of Worship or the Assembly Hall, where we customarily meet during summer at 35th Street, because we value human life above all else. Since March, we have sacrificed our spiritual and social face-to-face time to slow the spread of COVID-19 among our members and humanity at large. We have not stopped its spread, but we have helped to slow it down. In times like these, it is not a moral obligation to go to worship in a physical space. I agree. And I'll tell you, I love being at worship, whether I am in the pulpit or in the pew. When I am home in Orange, New Jersey on a Sunday, Jody and I typically attend Community Church of New York, where we are both members. It is not a strict obligation to be in a particular place at a particular time, but it is a strong moral obligation to be in the right place at the right time and doing the right thing. Since the start of the pandemic, one or both of us has watched this service at noon on a laptop. The broadcast service of the church I serve is about an hour and a half earlier, so I get to be part of both unless the Harrisburg online coffee hour runs on and on, as it sometimes does. And then, of course, even remotely, there are those meetings that demand attention. This church has had a congregational meeting on a Sunday afternoon online also. But I attend this virtual service to community whenever I can. I may be the minister of the Unitarian Church of Harrisburg, Pennsylvania. However, the Community Church of New York is my church and you are my people. But where are we? Each of us is, I hope, where we need to be this day. One place you and I need to be is in this religious community, even if our presence is segmented in time and space. This is especially important now because, as the philosopher Slavoj Žižek, author of the very new book on pandemic, reminds us, and I quote, "What is now going on is something we until now considered impossible. The basic coordinates of our normal lives are disappearing. Our first reaction to the virus was to regard it as just a nightmare from which we would soon awaken. Now we know this will not happen. We will have to learn to live in a viral world. A new way of living will have to be painfully reconstructed." It has been 5 months and 1 day since the lockdown began in New York City, and we have all adapted and developed routines for coping. We are shaping new coordinates for our lives. When Jerry Brown and I were discussing the music for this service, he described the morning routine he has developed during the pandemic. One day, he walks around the corner from his apartment to the market. The next day, he walks to Central Park and sits on a bench and reads. He then, the next day, walks around the corner to the market, and then the next day, he walks to the bench in Central Park and reads. He alternates his mornings this way, and he has created an adaptive routine because of the disruption of our lives and his life. All of us have done some of that, but some of the changes are wearing thin on us. We would like our old routines back. Even worse, because of unemployment on the heels of the pandemic and the recent expiration of much of the aid offered under the CARES Act, unless Congress acts very soon, a wave of evictions is about to follow the waves of infection. Where you and I are spiritually and emotionally is as real in the room where we are seated or on the ground where we stand. And where we are is no longer bound by the basic coordinates of our normal lives. In fact, we live with fear, uncertainty, anxiety, and sometimes even a sense of powerlessness. Many today are in a state of fear. Given the unknowns about the long-term course of the virus and the fact that it can be fatal, there is good reason to be fearful. The future is going to be different. We've already made the present different in order to protect ourselves from the virus. And it'll be very different from the recent past, which was already fearful for many among us, and for good reason. Try not to let whatever fear there is dominate your thinking, but do not ignore it. Fear is a warning, a prod to action, and just as important, it can be a prod to understanding. Today, many are in a state of uncertainty because we do not know what will happen next. When I go out of my house and go up the street to the bakery with a mask on and sunglasses and a cap, I don't know who I will meet along the way, and usually meeting someone unexpectedly is a surprise. But we don't know who is walking down the street, and who is walking down the street without a mask might well be infected. We know some of the things that we can do to make the situation less worse than it might be. And many of us in this metropolitan area have been doing the things we can to stop the spread of the virus and maintain some structure in our lives. And this gathering for worship is one of the things we do to mitigate the damage of the pandemic and keep us spiritually healthy. Worship, whether in person or virtual, is an anchor for all of our lives. And so, I would add, is the coffee hour, even if remotely is a little less free-flowing than it is in the assembly hall. Today, many are in a state of anxiety. And anxiety is a response to a situation that a person cannot control and may not even understand. And this is often the case when we experience fear and uncertainty. Anxiety is a perfectly understandable response to the unknowns we face and the fear we face. But anxiety can get in the way of making good decisions. It can contribute even to bad decisions. It can be paralyzing. One manifestation of anxiety is a really deep uncertainty of how to act, even when one has accurate knowledge and a positive location from which to act. So if you ever find yourself feeling paralyzed by anxiety, please get on the phone with someone you trust. That person may not give you the solution to what is causing the anxiety, but your talking just might help you lower your level of anxiety to where you can manage what is right in front of you. And some people are in a state where they feel powerless. However, I have to say that in spite of this, and I certainly feel a bit powerless when I look at what the course of the disease and protecting myself from possible infection as a senior citizen with, at least one other, hazard. In spite of this, since the beginning of the spring, there have been events that has shown a refusal to be powerless. And this began in the spring with responses to the continued murders of Black men and women by police. And those of us who've been around a while know that this has been going on as long as there have been police and long as there have been Black people being followed by police. But this time it brought forth a storm of protests across the country. The lightning strike that set the storm off was the police murder of George Floyd. It was not the first murder of an unarmed Black person by police, and there had been protests for Breonna Taylor's killing and others. But this was the one killing that not only energized Black people in the communities under attack, but also white allies across the country and even around the world. Small changes have begun and the protests have not stopped. Defund the police? Politicians who have said they would are hedging their promises, but some budgets have already been shifted in several large cities. The power of the threat we face is great, even when there are horrible political actors wielding power, as is the case with our current national administration. We have power, and part of that is the power of the ballot, and we won't let them steal it. If they try, this summer's past civil uprisings will look like playground spats by comparison. The actions to date have demonstrated the power that people have and refuse to let go of. The actions you and I have already taken declare that we do not believe that we are truly or completely powerless. There are, however, situations where we will experience genuine powerlessness. In spite of all precautions and good medical care, people will get sick with the virus and people will die. A few days after I returned to Orange, New Jersey for the shutdown, a police car and a station wagon labeled medical examiner were parked across the street from my house, and an ambulance was parked in front of the house next door. After a few hours, 2 men in hazmat suits went into the house next door. After a while, they came out with a stretcher bearing the body of my 32-year-old neighbor, a young man who had, a few years ago, immigrated from Central America, was married, and had 3 young children. I spoke with the police in the car across the street. Yes, they confirmed it was a COVID call. Late in the spring, our beloved Gersel Henry died from the virus. And I know that people keep asking if we have any recordings of her singing. But as Jerry Brown has told us again and again, Gersel sang for the people, not for the microphone. Hearing her voice one more time would help those of us who knew Gersel and miss her to grieve. Where the powerless feels the worst is in these personal situations in which people die alone and families and friends cannot even sit with them or have services to ease the pain. However, we can face the fear together, even when we are physically apart. We can find ways to give our lives shape in the face of uncertainty, even if it would be easier if we could see each other face to face and hug and touch hands. Anxiety is tough, it is hard to pin down, but we can help each other with that. Because when we can face the fear, the uncertainty, and the anxiety with others, we can find power and confidence together. You and I already know we have power together, but sometimes we need to remind ourselves of that. So solidarity is power in practice. Those of you who have heard me before, have known me for a long time, know that I consider solidarity to be a religious practice. It is the flesh and blood manifestation of that which protects lives that may be shattered. It is the shape of love in the world, and it takes many forms. The church universal, as John Haynes Holmes called it. The beloved community, which Martin Luther King called us to join and build. These are communities of solidarity. Black Lives Matter is a community of solidarity. In this time and place, the Community Church of New York is a community of solidarity. We continue to live and join in struggles, whether personal or collective, in solidarity with one another. It is tough that we are unable to greet each other face to face in a familiar space. I begin to close by offering a brief and wise quotation from Slavoj Zizek. He says, "Not to shake hands and to isolate when needed is today's form of solidarity." Even physically apart, we are in the place where we need to be, doing what we need to do for ourselves, our families, our fellow church members, our neighbors, and the world that is suffering. Here we are in solidarity. Let us live and work well in this place. Amen and blessed be.